And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. In the early 1900s, British Columbia's population and workforce were growing rapidly. Forestry, fishing, and mining were the province's core industries. Working conditions in the woods, on boats, and in mines were often shockingly dangerously. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1989.
For over 100 years, we've been logging our vast stands of timber, and for just as long, people have died doing it. There's kind of a rough romance associated with the logging industry. Rugged men braving whatever pitfalls the land and the elements throw at them. Men who shrug off the inherent dangers of the job as all part of a day's work. But there are many injuries that can't be shrugged off, injuries that maim, and injuries that kill.
Yeah, I've seen a few. Seen a few fatals and lots of little ones.
Have you ever had any injuries?
Oh, the odd few, I guess. Yeah.
What sort?
Oh, I broke my hip, hit by a log.
Logging in BC is arguably the most dangerous industrial occupation in the world. And for, I guess, as long as people have been logging in this province, there have been fatalities.
In the 1980s, an average 34 workers have been killed every year in BC's forest industry. That's a disturbing number, but it's only half the number of workers killed every year in the 1950s. Still, the figure is too high, and safety officials say it can and must be reduced. Logging is a dangerous occupation, but many of those dangers can be eliminated. Here in the Northwest, 8 forest sector workers died on the job last year. That number is higher than any other region in the province. Part of the reason for that is because of the number of people working in the industry in this area. But the rate of fatalities and injuries is also high in the Northwest because of the kind of logging that's underway. The trees are bigger and the methods of harvesting them more risky than in the interior. As well, the terrain is often steep and hazardous. And workers warn, as the cut blocks move higher and higher up the mountains, the job risks also climb.
Might be getting worse because the logging's not on the flat ground anymore. It's getting more rugged logging all the time, steeper ground.
Although there's less guys, it's just harder logging.
Just harder logging, yeah. Basically, you're logging slide areas now instead of the flats. When I first started logging, it was all flat land.
And that adds an element of danger, obviously.
Yeah, oh yeah, steeper ground, falls, yeah, slides, anything. It's a lot rougher and steep ground than the flat going.
Gunnar Eide is one member of a crew at a logging show up the Copper River Valley, just outside of Terrace. The type of operation underway here uses a grapple yarder to bring the logs from where they've been fallen to the roadside for decking and loading onto the trucks. Other types of logging use a spar tree and high leads, and in some areas, particularly in the interior, skidders are used to transport the timber. Like all logging methods, grapple yarding has its dangers for the workers involved, but some jobs are more hazardous than others, and Gunnar Eide's is one of the worst. He's out in amongst the fallen trees, spotting for the machine operator, being his eyes, when the lie of the land prevents him from seeing the trees and guiding the big grapple to them. Gunnar Eide's position is called the hooker, and although he is in radio contact with his workmate, being in among the tangle of broken branches, with the massive steel claw bouncing around and the big trees being dragged out, creates a serious degree of danger.
You have to be really careful, yeah.
Kind of heads up, is it?
Oh yeah, all the time. Plus a cold one in this weather.
So do you ever get scared down there?
Oh yeah, night logging you do. Because then you're out there all alone and it's pretty black. But actually it's a pretty decent job, really. Make good money.
The main reason why this particular job is as dangerous as it is because the worker is on the ground, not in a machine. He can't be as easily protected as his counterparts running the heavy equipment, who can be protected by tough metal caging. With the industry becoming more mechanized with less actual hands-on operations, the number of accidents is decreasing.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Before 1917, a person's only option for compensation following an injury at work in British Columbia was to sue the employer. That changed with a historic compromise in which workers gave up their right to sue the employer, and the employers agreed to fund a no-fault insurance system. Let us return to the archives with Ross Pallett.
I think for the most part it's due to increased technology, the fact that we've got more machinery in the woods and we've got less people on the ground. The technology has improved. In many instances we can get a man off the ground and into a machine surrounded by a protected structure.
Of all the jobs in the forest sector, the most dangerous is falling. In the past 5 years, 62 fallers have been killed at the worksite. Over 6,300 have been injured. Simple carelessness is the main cause of accidents. Most of those fallers killed had at least 10 years' experience. Perhaps familiarity with the job leads to relaxed safety awareness. With many jobs, it might not be so serious, but for fallers, it could mean the difference between life and death.
I've been falling over 15 years. You've got to see everything. That's the big thing. And it's not just a case of seeing what's above you. Is when you start to fall a tree, it's knowing where it's going to land. If there's dry wind falls around and so on, what it's going to do when it hits them. How many there are, where they are, what kind of a chain effect it's going to have.
Falling trees is a particularly risky endeavor because of the number of variables involved. One of the biggest area of dangers comes from overhead. Branches can break off. As well, the falling tree can catch a second tree, bringing it down unexpectedly. These falling snags kill people every year. Most accidents of this nature happen because of carelessness. The faller simply forgets to check every tree before bringing it down. Another overhead danger during the winter months comes from snow. As it piles up in the branches, the snow can cause a couple of dangerous conditions.
In the wintertime, you've got the snow in the trees. We haven't got any here right now, but normally you've got to worry about how much difference is that snow going to make in the tree. Whether it's going to, even though the tree's leaning this way, is there snow heavier on this side and going to want to pull the tree that way. You've got to realize that when that tree starts to move, when it's starting to fall and all that snow starts to fall down, it's like a blizzard condition, total whiteout, so you can't see what's happening anymore. So you have to be able to anticipate beforehand that when this tree starts to fall, you're going to have to almost go by memory as to, okay, I've got a tree standing over here that I'm going to use for shelter. So as soon as it starts to go, you've got to be able to get over behind that tree and stand still. You don't want to be out there, you know, kind of looking up in the air and whatnot. You can't see anything because it is a total whiteout condition. So you don't want to be somewhere where something dropping through the air is going to come back at you or come down on top of you.
Injuries also occur from improper cutting practices. If the faller makes his undercut and back cut in a sloppy fashion, so they partially overlap, the tree might split as it's coming down, causing it to spin and kick back, perhaps striking the faller. A tree that splits like this when falling is called a barber chair. One logging practice that's extremely hazardous is called domino falling. That's when a series of trees are notched but not felled. Then, one tree is cut down into the others, knocking them all over at once.
Now, why would a faller want a domino fall?
There are a number of reasons. Sometimes it's as a result of poor planning. The trees are leaning in the wrong direction, and for the skidding operation, and the faller would have to spend a lot of time wedging each one over. He decides to take a chance and cut up several trees and try and hit them with what's called a pusher tree. But it's a very, very dangerous practice.
Improving safety in the woods industry and reducing the number of injuries and fatalities can often be achieved by improving attitudes. Safety equipment, such as hard hats, eye and ear protection, and high visibility clothing, are useless unless they're being used. Virtually all workers have accepted the use of protective equipment, which has reduced the number of injuries. Still, officials say the injury rate can be further reduced by increased awareness of safety procedures, by a general improvement in attitude. But that's not always easy.
Attitudes are very difficult to change. Very, very difficult. I can give you an analogy. Look at how long it took for us as a society to deem that drinking and driving was unacceptable. It's been decades. And I think that you're looking at that magnitude of change to get a changed attitude in safety. We as a society have been classified as a throwaway society, and one of the things we throw away is ourselves. There is not a high priority given to safety in general, safety in the home, safety in the workplace. It just is not a high priority for us as a society. And I don't really think you're going to see dramatic changes, truly dramatic changes, until that attitude and behavior does change.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. The province's Workmen's Compensation Act was passed in 1902, but did not come into force until 1917, when the Workmen's Compensation Board, known today as WorkSafe BC, was finally created. Let us return to the archives to discover how a WCB Safety Officer Rick Wallace prepares for a site visit.
Well, for the most part, I do a bit of planning before I come out here, so I'm familiar with the crew that I'm going to go see, and I know what type of operation I'm going to go visit. When I come out, I'll just look at the general layout of how they've got their machinery set up and their work processes that they're going through, and I'll go around and talk to the boys and see how things are going, and I'll ensure that there's proper first aid coverage and people are aware of what they're doing and they're actively thinking about trying to run a safe workplace. I'm pretty well the front lines of, I am the WCB to a lot of these people, and so the only person that they get to speak to is myself. So I come out and talk to them and find out what they're feeling and what they want.
If an inspector finds conditions that are a serious threat to workers, they have the power to shut down the work site immediately until the situation is corrected. If the safety infractions aren't so serious, employers can be given written orders detailing what corrections have to be taken. And if necessary, those orders can be backed up with sizable financial penalties.
We penalize firms for serious infractions of the regulations or for repeat infractions, and the penalties start at around $1,500, and they can be in excess of $100,000. We've levied in excess of $100,000 penalties.
The basic premise under which we operate is that the employer is responsible for providing a safe work environment. He must do everything reasonably possible to ensure worker safety. And if there are serious violations of our industrial health and safety regulations, we are prepared to go to penalty when that is necessary. That is in dramatic contrast to what the board used to do 5 years ago.
The Workers' Compensation Board says safety is everyone's responsibility. It's not a matter of individual choice. That's why the fines for safety infractions have increased significantly in the past 5 years. The board will not allow workers or companies to take chances, even if they want to put their own health on the line.
We know the results. The results are very dramatic. You've had an average in the 1980s of 34 loggers killed every year. That is just totally unacceptable.
Is it expensive?
The average fatality now is about $125,000. The fatalities, however, pale in comparison to the permanent disabilities. Those quite frequently range from $600,000 to $900,000. They're very, very expensive. In many cases, what you're dealing with is a measure of apathy, possibly ignorance, in that it's quite common to hear a comment that, well, we've always done it this way, and no one's ever been hurt. And for that particular group of workers, that may be true. Of course, we get a much more global view of that, and we know certain situations do cause fatal and serious injuries, and we take a very hard line on those situations.
Officials say they've often had trouble convincing employers to implement safety procedures because of fear it would be expensive. The monetary costs would not be offset by the benefits of improved worker safety.
That is not always true, because in many cases what the deficiency is in training, which may involve very low or minimal cost. There are situations that do come up that people take shortcuts because of cost, but that is not universal.
Most employees are starting to realize that a safe workplace is also a productive workplace, and the two go together hand in hand. And if everybody's aware of what they're doing and is trained in what they're doing, they're going to be more confident at it. They're going to produce more wood or more whatever the workplace is doing. And that's the name of the game. That's what they're out here, is to make some money, you know. We're just out here to ensure that they're doing it safely.
The forests of the Northwest will continue to provide jobs for hundreds of people for many years. But those forestry jobs will, unfortunately, cause injuries for many workers, and some will die. The number of fatalities is decreasing, but it'll never be completely eliminated. Last year was a bad year for logging deaths in the Northwest. 8 people went to work and never came home. While that kind of statistic will always come with forest industry jobs, officials say it can be reduced partly through the proper use of safety equipment and procedures, but mostly through a better attitude.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Many different harvesting systems and equipment are available to today's logger. Options range from small skidders to large scar lines to helicopters, with a wide variety in between. Two of the most important tasks faced by a logger are to select the best harvesting system and equipment for a given site, and to use the selected equipment in the best way possible. In this final segment of Open Connection, we discover what logging system was decided for Chindamash Creek.
The environmentally sensitive valley has a stream running through it. It's valuable fish habitat, and the timber along the stream bank was never meant to be logged. But if the wood is to be removed, the best way to do it is with the skyline.
We're looking for preservation of the fish habitat. The Department of Federal Fisheries has been involved extensively in this harvesting operation. They're quite concerned with water quality, gravel quality in this stream. They have major fisheries concerns downstream from this site. Even though fish don't spawn here, it's the downstream impacts they're worried about. And in order to harvest here, we had to ensure that we would not further destabilize or erode any of the stream bank systems. In order to do that in the valley bottom, we are having to suspend the logs above both the stream and any remaining residual stems that are standing, and pull the wood in the air fully suspended.
The logging contractor works for Skeena Cellulose of Terrace. Chindamash Creek Valley has been logged before, but a leaf strip of trees was left standing along the water's edge to protect the banks from erosion. Now many of those trees have been knocked down, not by power saws, by the wind, and the trees are being removed, salvaged, for their timber value. Skeena Cellulose officials didn't plan to be logging on the Chindamash site this year, but sometimes when Mother Nature acts up, even the best laid out logging plans go out the window and changes have to be made. It was about a year ago that a savage storm whipped across a large swath of the Northwest. High winds and torrential downpours knocked out roads and bridges, flooded homes, and caused millions of dollars in damage. An area around Smithers was declared an emergency zone, but the damage wasn't limited to population areas. When Skeena Cellulose officials flew over their licensed timber stands following the storm, they didn't like what they saw. From a height, it doesn't look too bad.
This is a big patch here, is it?
And on this right down by the river as well, all along.
But drop down a little closer, and the damage becomes much more apparent. Blowdown. The powerful storm winds flatten sections of forest, toppling the big trees in all directions.
You get a better idea here just how much timber is laying around there.
What a mess it really is.
In total, Skeena Cellulose lost an estimated 550 hectares of timber to blowdown, containing some 175,000 square meters of wood. It's not a huge amount of timber, but it is significant. A good portion of the drainage valleys in the terrace area have been logged. There isn't enough wood remaining to allow any of it to go to waste, so as much as possible must be recovered from the blowdown sites. It means back to the planning board to make a few changes to logging plans.
A lot of the areas that we viewed today, we had to change our road building plans this spring in order to incorporate the harvest this winter and next year. roads have to be built 1 year ahead, so we had to pull out of some areas that we planned to go ahead and develop and lay out new roads and incorporate that into this year's plan.
Not all the blowdown timber can be recovered within the 2 or 3 years before it begins to rot. Some is too inaccessible, and there's lost volume because of the breakage. The majority of the wood will go to waste. The company won't be able to get to many of the blowdown areas.
There's such a large number of these small patches, and they are scattered throughout the drainages, and quite often they're at the higher elevations.
And logging the already fallen patches of timber is considerably more dangerous than if it's standing. The broken logs are lying about like pickup sticks. Moving in among the mess and cutting up the timber takes an experienced faller.
Well, because of the disorganized fashion, a faller generally would be faced with a number of trees laying on top of one large tree, and he's going to have to account for all the weight and the different physics behind the trees laying down. If he's to cut off the end of one log, it may spring up straight up in the air due to a tree line across the other end of that log.
A lot of unforeseens.
Yes, a lot of unforeseens, and in order to do it safely, he's got to take a lot into account when he does the bucking.
The storm basically came down this valley, and you can see a lot of the patches show up here. Some of the patches show up as just a little bit of yellowing in the trees, but there's a whole mess of just little spots all the way along this hillside. Yeah, and if you plot out all the damage that happened during the storm, the storm came right straight through here in a line. You can down in the Kitimat Valley and the Hirsch Creek and all through there. It came through in a line. And
while some of the fall down areas are where you might expect them to be, along the edges of clear cuts, where the wood is unprotected from the wind, not all the blowdown is associated with openings.
The important part to note is the roads above it are not the cause of the windfall. It's those roads have been put in to salvage the windfall.
Much of the blowdown is found in isolated patches, or in some instances, the wind has whipped past trees on the edge of clearings and damaged other trees that appear to be protected. It seems as if small wind eddies whisked over some areas and touched down in others, scattering the timber in a rotational pattern.
Majority of the timber that did fall last fall was the result of small eddies further up the hillside from the valley bottoms and from our cut blocks, quite out of reach of any development or planned development in the near or long-term future. These are small patches that are basically circular in shape, and the trees have just been blown over.
At the Chindamash Creek blowdown site, the timber is salvaged using the Skyline logging system. The remote control Sky Car hoists the logs straight up before bringing them into the landing, so the logs don't have to be skidded over the ground, perhaps further damaging the environmentally sensitive creek. It's one of the first test sites for Skyline logging in the Northwest, and officials say it's working well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.